Hello, everyone. We are going to jump into another one of our lessons, and this is kind of a two-part lesson. We're covering this lesson and the next one will cover two highly linked topics. And because of that, I'm going to say now, for those of you that are here taking part in the lesson, to hold off on questions that talk about comparisons with the topic we're learning today, which is Rashi. You can see it on the screen. And the other two grammar expressions that are very similar in usage, that would be so and yo. Those typically sentence ending expressions that are used to show information that you've heard or things that you suspect, based on information that you've gathered. And there's slight differences. We're going to talk about the difference between all of them, but I prefer to do it tomorrow after we get, or by tomorrow, I mean the next lesson, after we get through all three of them. So today we're just going to focus on the two usages of Rashi and go with that. So, with that in mind, let's get started. Now, if you have studied Rashi at all, it probably bugs you a little bit because, like Soul, the one we're going to do next time, it actually has two completely separate usages, completely different usages. Not only that, but the way it fits into the sentence is different as well. And Rashi is it's an e adjective. However, it is also used not as an e adjective, and you'll see what I mean when we get into it. So it's got two separate meanings. We're going to talk about both of them today, and I would not try and strain your head and like separate them, or not separate them, push them together and say, oh, well, they're linked this way. I've always found it easier to think of them as two completely separate usages. They just happen to have the same the same way of writing it and saying it. Okay, let's get started. So the first one is the one that is going to link to our next lesson. That's talking about uh, reporting information, reporting either information or reporting something that you think is true based on information that you've gotten first or second hand. And with this one, now this is really important to remember. This one is, and it shows you all the different ways that it can be used, and we'll see some examples in a minute. But the thing I want you to focus on is what's at the bottom of the page. And I'm going to read it real fast. Rashi can finish a sentence or a clause or be followed by da or des. So you might be thinking, Rashi really looks like an e adjective. Hey, it's got the e on the end of it. And there are times where you use it like an e adjective, where you have rashkunai or rashkatta. However, when we're talking about the seam, I'm going to abbreviate it as that. When we're talking about the seam version, Rashi is not, but at the same time it kind of is not always an e adjective. By that I mean at the end of the sentence, it will be followed by des or da. So you've seen, and let me compare it. If you say something is cute, for example, kalchan, you would say kawaii desu. And real fast, I'll let you do this. Anyone, if I want to make that the casual form, then if I want to say it's cute, but say it casually, what would I change in the sentence? It would go from kawaii desu to what? Anyone? Feel free to type it into the channel. Taking the polite sentence kawaii desu, how will we make it a casual? Kawaii, yes. You just drop that des right off the end. However, with Rashi, that's not the case. With Rashi, you get Rashi des, you also get Rashi da. So you can also drop the da if you want, but it can be on there. It can be on there. Okay, let's look at some examples and we'll actually get it and start to see what it actually means. So as you notice, rashi can follow basically anything. We see a verb up at the top, an e adjective, a na adjective, and a noun. So all of our key term types. And notice that there's nothing in between, even with the na adjective or the nouns. Now, often we'd say like taihen na, or there might be a no in between, especially when you have a noun in front. But in this case, you don't have any of those. So if we're saying, oh, that thing seems to be broken, we might say kawareteru rashi. Let me say that one more time. Kawareteru rashi. And note that there's nothing in between. Also note that these do need to be casual, so you could not, for example, say this. I just typed into the channel, kawaretemasu rashi. That does not work. So if anyone wants to stick because I can't find it, stick a little X mark next to it, I'd appreciate that. So we need to keep the casual form here. Yasashi rashi, taihen rashi, and suiyobi rashi. So these are all used in this form. And again, the key word that you usually hear when translating this is seems or heard. So there's two slightly different meanings there, but let's look at the full sentences and we'll see how those play out. So let's take a look at the first two. So let's say that, there's a bicycle and there's two different ways. You might have heard that someone else said it's broken. And you haven't verified it yourself, but they said it's broken, so it's probably broken. Or you're looking at it and it appears to be broken. Now you might not know if it's broken or not because you haven't ridden it, but you're looking at it and, for example, maybe the chain looks a little bit loose. And you're thinking, if I were to ride that, it probably wouldn't work. So you can see there's two slightly different usages here. One of them is referring to you looking at the information firsthand, looking at the bicycle and saying, I'm not quite sure if that's working. It might be broken. The other one is you're taking information from someone else or something else. It could be a person, it could be a newspaper. I'm not sure why newspapers would be reporting on broken bicycles, but you get the idea. And you're taking that secondhand information and repeating it. So you're not sure if it's true or not. So this is in both situations, whether you're getting the information from someone else or you're observing it yourself, it's not verified information. It could be 99% true. I mean, you could look at the bike and you say, that really looks like it's broken, but you haven't checked. Of course, if the bike is broken and you know that's the case, you would just say the bike is broken. 自転車が壊れている. And that would be fine. But this rashi is, in a sense, it's almost like hedging language, where you're stepping back from the truth because you don't know the truth. And you're like, I think this is the case. This seems to be the case, but I'm not sure 100%. So if you're reporting something that you feel is more or less accurate, but you're not sure, this is a great way to use it. Let's look at the next one. コンサートは水曜日らしい. So we've got a concert and, it appears to be on Wednesday. I've heard the concert is on Wednesday, and you're taking this information and it's information you got from somewhere else, or you might, for example, I'll give you a real example. Here in Niigata, there was a concert a few weeks ago, and we guessed the concert was the next day, on the Saturday, because we saw them getting ready the day before. So we would have said konsato, or live is another way of saying it in Japanese, raibu. Raibu wa doyobi rashi. So it seems like the concert is tomorrow because look, they're setting things up. There was a whole bunch of groupies around the area, listening to music out of their tiny car stereos. So we're taking all that information and then making a judgment based on that. So, and again, Renshu is giving you a few other examples. You might have seen a flyer or you heard it from someone, and you can talk about it in that way. And note that typically, Rashi, you're going to see at the end of the sentence. Not always. And of course, you might see it at the end of a clause in more complex sentences, but clauses are, in the end, they're tiny sentences. But you usually see it at the end because you're reporting, information. You might see it used earlier on. If we take this first sentence, the broken bike, you might say something like this. I'm going to type it out for you. You might see this. 自転車が壊れているらしい。だから、and I'm putting unnatural pauses just to make it easier to hear. 壊れているらしい。だから、歩いていこう。Seems like the bike is broken, so, and I'm not sure why you would be saying let's walk. It sounds like two people are riding the bike at the same time, but yeah, it looks like the bike's broken, so let's walk. So then you still have a clause, but it's coming at the end of that clause. Let's check out a few more examples, and then we're going to practice it a little bit. So these two are using the adjectives. We had the nouns and verbs here. And again, adjective usage is exactly the same. You're just slapping it onto the end of it. 先生は優しいらしい. Now, there's something that you might notice that might seem strange here. So Renshu gives a couple of ways of translating it or thinking about this sentence. 先生は優しいらしいです. Sorry. And it says, I heard the new teacher is nice, or the new teacher seems nice. Now, in this sentence, new actually isn't in there. And you could put it in. You could explicitly say, 新しい先生は優しいらしいですね, and throw it in there. But the English translation here is it's stepping away from the literal translation just a little bit. And think about it. If you're talking about a teacher seeming nice, or I heard that a teacher is nice, you're probably referring to a teacher that you haven't had experience with, a new teacher. Otherwise, if it's a teacher you see every day, you would not say rashi, because you wouldn't need to make a guess. You wouldn't have to say seems. You have that factual, now it might be subjective, but factual information nonetheless, at least from your perspective. So, new here isn't explicitly required in the sentence, but you might see it, be thought of this way because typically this would be used to refer to a new teacher. But they might seem nice. They might have a smile and they walked in and they didn't, slam their books on the desk when they got in there. And so, oh, that teacher seems nice. They might be right in front of you and they just started saying, hello, class, nice to meet you. Or it could be that you saw them walking down the hallway or you heard other kids talking about them. Maybe your friends had them one period earlier. Yeah, that teacher's really nice. They're great. And you're not sure. That's what they said. You're not sure, so you could use this. Now, this is a sentence that we could, link to Japanese really easily. 英語のテストは大変らしい. So, this test, this English test, or we could think of it as a Japanese test, have we had the test yet? No. So where are we getting this information from? It could be that someone else walked out of the test previous period and they're crying. they're crying and screaming, hitting their head against the wall, and you say, ooh, that that test must be hard, based on what you saw. It could be that the test just dropped down right in front of you and it's an inch thick or 2.5 centimeters thick, and you're thinking, "Ooh, this looks hard." It could be either situation, but you don't know for sure, so you're going to use this rashi uh, situation. And again, it doesn't matter where you're getting the information from, whether it's secondhand or firsthand, but you're taking it and then making a judgment based on that information. But you're not 100% sure if it's true or not. So this is the first usage of Rashi. And we're going to talk about one more in just a few minutes. But before that, I'd like to practice just a little bit. And as I told some of you before the lesson, I'm still getting over a cold. Otherwise, I would have prepared for this a little bit more. So I unfortunately do not have any pictures to show you, but I'm going to type out in English. So I'm going to keep the question part simple. I'm going to type out in English something. And consider that the information that you are getting in. Either someone told you or you're seeing it yourself. And then if you'd like to, again, you're not required to, but if you'd like to, I'd like you to try making a sentence based on it. And I know that for those of you that this is more of a review than learning something new, you might be inclined to use, for example, so, the so usage, which is a better fit in some situations. However, let's stay away from that. Let's stick to just Rashi for today. The next lesson, we'll mix them all together. Now, if you are typing it out, if you want to, you're not required to, but you can use spoilers to hide your message just so other people might have a bit more time to think about it. But I'll leave it up to you. So let's try. Let's try. And this is actually accurate for me earlier today. So this is what my morning was. So you wake up, you see dark clouds outside. So that's your information. In this case, it's firsthand. You look out and you see some clouds outside. What could you say using Rashi based on that information? What guess could you make that you're pretty sure is true, but not 100%? So I'll give you a minute to try and think about this, and I'll give my answer once we're all done. For those of you that aren't familiar with when we practice, I don't call out answers and say, look how bad this answer is. I've never said that in my life. But I'll make small comments on how to improve a sentence if I notice anything. But we don't talk about people's names. We just, are here to practice the Japanese and hopefully make your Japanese a little bit better. So, and we don't have too many people in here today. It's a smaller group, but give it a shot. You see dark clouds outside, and what might you say about it? And as a few of you are typing, giving it a shot, I'm going to step away. I'll be back in just a minute. I see two people have already put out answers. I'm not going to comment on anything until we have several more out. And I always love, and I thought this when I was in classroom teacher as well. I always like to see what learners say or type or write because it's always different from what I expect in a good way. Because everyone thinks in different ways, and even a simple concept, there's so many different ways to use it that practicing like this can really help us take a fuzzy understanding of something and really clear that up. And so once you're done, you say, oh, I have a much firmer grasp. I might feel like I could try using this kind of thing. Compared to a, if I saw it, I'd understand it, but there's no way I'm going to use it. So I always like seeing these answers. Don't see anyone else typing. I mean, I do see one person typing, so I'll give you about 30 more seconds. Of course, you can keep typing even when I'm talking, as people often do. There's no everyone stop writing and listen to me. There's none of that in our lessons. Okay. So if you are typing and you want to keep typing, please continue to do so. So I'm going to tell you, this is not to say that anything aside from this is wrong, but the two that popped into my head, my simple, boring head, were these two. I would either say, I was thinking this one, or much more simply, this one. You know, the first one, if we were to translate into English, I'd say it seems like it's going to rain. The second one, it seems like rain. And just like in English, these are both perfectly acceptable. Now, the few comments on the other ones that came up, I love everyone trying it out. The thing with the te iru form, remember there's two forms of that. There's the ing, which means happening now, and there's the state. Something happened before. And the second one can be used with rashi. Well, the first one can too, but not necessarily. The second one was the example we saw earlier. The bike seems to be broken. You know, if a bike breaks, you think of breaking as an instantaneous action. Like it wasn't broken before and it's broken now. So there's some point in time where it breaks. As far as grammar is concerned. So after that, it's broken. Kawareteru. And with that, you can say it looks broken. You're not describing it looks like it's breaking now, you're describing the state afterwards. It looks like it's breaking. Now with rain, rain is an ing thing. Like it starts, it continues to do it for 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour or whatever, and then it ends. So not always, but if you're getting first-hand information, if you look outside and it looks dark, it probably isn't raining, but it looks like it's going to rain, then you would use the furu rashi instead of futteru rashi. However, and this is where it gets tricky, the person that wrote that sentence, let me rewrite it. Let me rewrite it down at the bottom so we have it in front of us. You could not use it. So this is interesting. You could not use it to describe what's in front of you because it can't look like it is raining. It's either raining or it's not because you can see it. However, what else could you use this in a different situation? Sure. This actually happened this morning. Is now I would have looked out immediately to check, and I did. But what if you heard the falling of rain outside? And it sounds like rain. Or what if you called someone on the phone and you could hear raining on their end? Then you might not know 100%, but you have this information and you're making a guess. And you could say, oh, yeah, it seems like it's raining because I hear something, but I don't see it. Or because I heard from someone else, or I could hear on the phone call and whatnot, and I'm reporting what they said. So with secondhand information, you could use that. So you can get a little tricky when you get into this specific situations of when it can and cannot be used. All right, let's keep going. But I love the sentence. I love everything that people put out, especially if there's a tiny little thing wrong with them because it helps you learn. And it's something I'm trying to teach my 7-year-old son who hates making mistakes. He's not not like his father at all, of course. Hates making mistakes and expects to get it right all the time. And I said, no, mistakes are the best way to learn. It makes things stick in your head. Now, furidasu, and I love this extension, the dasu. Um, I call it a verb. Whoops, that's not the right furi. There we go. That one. The furidasu means to start to rain. And it not only means it starts to rain, but compared to like furi hajimeru, to begin to rain, dasu represents a sudden thing. It's a sudden change. And you can't usually predict or expect a sudden change. Otherwise, it wouldn't be sudden, it would be expected. So, furidasu, you use a lot when it's like, oh, it just started raining. And you often use it after the fact to describe that sudden rain. But you wouldn't use it to talk about rain that you expect to fall. You'd say, well, it looks like it's going to rain. But you wouldn't say it looks like it's going to rain suddenly, if that makes sense. And arashi, sure, arashi probably ga. Kyo arashi ga aru rashi. Maybe not aru, maybe kuru. Because with the storm, it comes more so than it materializes. Like it comes from somewhere typically. They start somewhere, of course, but usually it moves into your area. But these are all very small things, but hopefully that helps you, pick that up. I wanted to do more of this practice, but I'm not sure if we have time. We talked about that a lot. So let's continue on to the next usage. If we have time at the end, we can practice a little bit more. So I apologize for jumping off on some vocabulary tangents. I hope it helped. Okay, next rashi. This one is the e adjective rashi. This one also is very specific in its usage, where the one before felt more, oh, you can use it in this situation, when you're looking at something, when you hear information. This one is none of that. And like I mentioned before, I would think of this as completely separate. I think of it as separate as, these two words sound the same, but they mean something completely different. And based on context, you would never, if you were hearing English, you would never hear one bear and think of the other bear. Same thing with red and red. And once you get a good feel for both of these, you will never say, oh, the other one can have a noun plus rashi. Also, this one can. So which one is it? I'm not sure. It won't happen. This one is only with nouns. You cannot use it for anything else. And this one does have an English translation that's fairly typical. And that, I didn't mean to say that. It's fairly typical to use this English, and the English is typical or just like. Typical of something or just like something. And it can be used to show any situation and taking that situation and describing it as typical of something. So, enough vague examples. Let's jump into some real ones. And I feel that, there's a bunch of ways you can use this, but I feel that people, you hear this the most often with people, as in a person now, whether it's a child or a person's name. You could say Michael Rashi, and you can also use it for other things, but I hear it most often with people. And so if you say kodomo rashi, note it comes right after the noun, just like before. That means like a child or typical of a child. So real fast, just a quick thing, just so we're all clear on what typical of means, or like. So typical of a child or like a child. What are some actions that you would ascribe to a child? You say, oh, that's, that's just like a child. That's typical of a child. So think of a generic child in your head. What are they doing? What's something they might be doing? And say it in English. This isn't for Japanese practice. This is just to get a feel for the realm. Throwing a tantrum. That happened to one of my son's friends just a few days ago. He didn't get enough time to play video games and he had a meltdown. Apparently, I was not at the house at the moment. It sounded like police could have been called level of decibels in terms of screaming. Now, you are all mentioning bad things, which is fine. This can definitely be used as bad things, and you're probably picking up in Renshu it mentions childish. Now, when we say childish, that has a negative nuance. However, this does not necessarily have to be a negative thing. It can be positive, negative, neutral. So, what's a non negative thing that children do? Just one. I'm sure you can think of one. So much energy. Yes. Unlimited energy. So, running around for 3 hours outside and not needing a single drink of water. That, that's a child, right? Okay. Thank you. I'm glad we did gibberish talking. Okay. I'm glad we swung back into the positive direction. So, kodomorashi could be used to describe things that are, similar to a child. Fuyurashi could be, and real fast, I'm going to give you 10 seconds because this is an easy one. What would be typical of winter? Like what kind of day? Because we're speaking about winter, so we're talking about weather. What type of weather is typical of winter? Real fast, go. 10 seconds. Snow, cold, and if you live in Niigata, cloudy weather. I don't know why. It's just clouds come in here for 4 months and they never leave. Okay. And then Kanojo Rashi is not referring to girls or a woman. It's referring to like a person. It's like, oh yeah, that's her. That's typical of her. That's what she does. That's a her thing. And you're referring to someone, in particular. You might say, if you're referring to women in general, which women, men, or whatever, I wouldn't recommend it. But you might say like josei rashi or otoko rashi, and those are gender norms, which, as most of us know, can be very fluid and change and whatnot. But there are, I guess, if you want to think in a traditional sense, some things that are more actions and behaviors that are more common with women or with men or whatever. And traditionally, we've used it to describe that. But more often than not, I see this being used to refer to specific people. Now, let's, before we get to some examples, let's look at a few things. Oh, and I apologize for the sniffing. I'm getting over a cold. This is an important thing. When you use this, you cannot use it to describe someone or something that is not that. So, and I think an example's coming up. Let's see. No, it'll come up a bit later. But, for example, fuyurashi, it's winter-like, or it's typical of winter. Let's say you had a crazy snowstorm in the middle of July, and I'm speaking from a northern hemisphere perspective, so it should be summer, but there's snow. You could not use rashi to describe that, because we use rashi to talk about winter and saying, for winter, this is typical. Or for children, this is typical. This is just like what a child would do. Of course, they're a child. So you're referring, whatever you're talking about in the sentence is the same noun. If my wife has something that she often does, and maybe the way she says something or the way she laughs, and then one day someone says, I do the same thing. I laugh the way that she laughs. And my son says, "Oh, that's just like mom. You sound just like her." You would not use rashi in that case. You would use a different one, but we're not jumping into that one today. So rashi is used to talk about the same thing. So these are very artificial sentences because you would never say kodomo rashi kodomo. But this is just used to show that kodomo rashi needs to be used to talk about children. It could not be used to talk about an adult. So let's take a look at some examples. 子供らしい声を聞いた. So what kind of voice is it? It's a voice typical of a child. So you're hearing a voice, a childlike voice, and it's coming from a child. It is coming from a child. Similarly, if it's winter, and let's say it's winter and it's snowing and it's cold, as you all pointed out, and you'd say, "Wow, today's this is a winter day." I mean, this is just typical of winter. 今日の天気は冬らしい or 降るらしいです. And that's fine. These might not be, things that you say, "Well, I don't really use this that much. I can't see myself using it." But I feel like the ones that talk about specific people is a much more common usage of it. And that might just be the way that I've heard the language. People experience the language in different ways. I hear more conversation and I do less reading, for example, of novels and magazines and whatnot. But I typically hear it with people. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an E adjective. So we can now take that E on the end and drop it and change it and make it negative. So let's take a look at this one. 学校を休むのは彼女らしくない. So let's break it down. We have one of those verb phrases at the beginning. So skipping school, or not necessarily skipping, but being absent from school, missing school. With yasumu, you don't have any specific positive or negative nuance attached to it. Now there is a word. Can anyone tell me what skipping actually is? Like if you skip school, as in I'm doing a bad thing, I'm skipping school, ha ha ha. What's the word for that? What's the verb? Does anyone know? It's one of those crazy verbs that you write in katakana and in hiragana. So we've got it is saboru, saboru, sabotta. And if you have um, Japanese on your computer, try typing that out and then pushing, the space bar to convert it, and you'll get this. Saboru. Anyway, so missing school, no wa kanojo rashiku nai. So we're using the negative to say, so skipping school or missing school, excuse me, missing school, that's not like her. That's not typical of her. And I'll give you a few more examples. So my daughter is she's 5, and she is still working on having a better feeling for how much food she can put on her plate and finish it. And she's also in the I know dessert. Some kind of dessert is coming later on, so maybe I should say I'm full now and then get that dessert out. That's pretty typical for a child, I think. But it's very common for her. So I might say this. Let me type it out real fast. 食べ物を残すのは娘らしい. So leaving food is typical of her. It's a work in progress. So you can use it in the positive form, in the negative form. You can use it in the past tense form, to describe something that um, used to be typical of someone, but isn't now. So we have about 10 minutes left in today's lesson, and this one is an interesting one. I'd like to practice this a little bit more. And what I'd like you to do, I don't expect you to out anyone and say bad things about someone and put their name or good things. Just take uh just take someone and you can refer to them as mother or father, brother or sister if you want, or you can just make up a name for them and you can just call them A-san. So think about someone in your life, someone that you know. It could be me. Say something about me, good or bad. I don't care. And say something that is typical. Let's start with the typical ones. So let's use the positive form. Think of an action that is typical for someone that you know. And this is the way you're going to write it. You're going to have the thing, and then we need to make a verb phrase out of it. So we need that no after it. Something, something, noa. And then you have the person, rashi. Or if you want to be slightly more polite, rashi desu. So please give this a try. And you don't need to say you're doing this, but if you're the kind of person that thinks I'd love to participate, but I don't want to type. I don't want to. I'm embarrassed or whatever. The reason doesn't matter. Um, Try saying it to yourself. Try writing it down on a piece of paper in front of you. Any step you take to practice it is more than nothing. And you might think to yourself, oh, well, other people are typing it in and I should be doing that. I'm a bad learner, blah, blah, blah. That's not true. It's 100% not true. If you can do more than what you're doing now, even a little bit more, that's still a step in the right direction. And I applaud that. I think that's great. So I'm going to step away for just a minute as people, let me read the first two that came up. 毎日散歩するのは A さんらしい. Perfect. So for this A-san, whoever it is, it's typical of them to walk every day. Or you might hear, you might hear them saying, I'm going for a walk. And you're like, yep, that's what you do. That's typical of you. It's just like you. And that's a positive sentence. The second one that came up is a negative nuance, not necessarily complaining, but bento wasureru no wa Tanaka-san rashii desu. Yeah. Oh, Tanaka, he or she, they forgot their bento again. That's just like them. They're always forgetting their bento. Silly Tanaka. So two wonderful examples. Anyway, I'll be back in a minute. I hope to see a few more examples when I return. So the next person's talking about, again, our friend Asan, who apparently is always writing long letters. So for the person that just put something out, typically, and the tricky thing is there's nothing I feel that would say, oh, this is the way it's usually done. You just have to see it happen. Um, Typically, when you have a a typical action or a typical state or whatever that you're using to ascribe to a person, um, like the ones before, usually the action comes first or the state comes first. You know, it's snowing, it's cold, uh, they eat they eat breakfast. And so I would take the asagohan no tabemasu and I'd move that to the front. And then you need to get that verb phrase. When I say verb phrase, I mean you're taking the verb and changing it into a noun. And that's it's verb to noun. And so you would say asagohan no taberu no wa kare rashi. I'll say that one more time. Asagohan no taberu no wa kare rashi. And then you'd be okay. So someone is throwing shade at us foreigners, which this is just an aside. I remember many years ago that can you use it on yourself? I think so. I don't think I've used it on myself before, but I'm trying to think if there's a reason why I couldn't. That's just like me. Yeah, I think it would work. I just don't think it's particularly common. Oh, but back to the uh talking about foreigners. And if if we had to boil all foreigners down to an average foreigner and drop them in Japan, they are typically louder than the Japanese people, especially on public transportation. But I was in America. I'm American. I was in America many years ago, and there was a group of Japanese, I presume, travelers, because we were at a tourist site as well. We were traveling, and they either were talking about us or talking about someone else nearby, and they referred to them as foreigners, as gaikokujin, which I thought was interesting because I thought you're in America, you're the foreigner here, relatively speaking, but they gaikokujin is for Japanese people, it's not Japanese. They're foreigners in that sense. They have their point of reference is still Japan. And so even when they're outside of Japan, they were still like, "Oh, look, they're foreigners." I didn't say anything, of course, but I thought, that's interesting. Now I can't say how often, if that's typical of Japanese people to say that, because I don't have too many data points, but it did happen. So if I bring it up, someone had a question. It's typical of him to skip breakfast. You could I would I'd probably just say this. I'd say, let me find my mouse. There we go. You could just say this because you are saying something that is typical. So you want the rashi on the end. It's a positive statement in the yes no sense. But before the no, you don't have to have a positive verb. You can have a negative verb there. So you could say asagohan no tabenai no wa, and that'd be fine. I'm trying to think if there's another verb that might be better. You don't really pass. You don't skip. I feel like that's probably the most common, but don't hold me to it. Aha, I like the one that just came up because it's one of the few sentences up until now that did not use a verb. There's a noun. That way of speaking is typical of Japanese people. Sure. So that's a really good example. I love that. And so to expand on that in the last few minutes we have, so what kind of speaking might we be talking about? It might be like self-deferential, putting yourself down, not saying anything too good about yourself, saying, "Oh, no, no, I'm not that good," or "This food isn't that delicious," food that that person made. And so that self-deferential way of speaking would be is very common. It's part of Japanese culture. And so if a Japanese person was speaking that way, and I could see this being said in a classroom environment, for example, they show a video of two Japanese students speaking, and one Japanese student says to the other Japanese student, "Oh, your drawing is so good." And it's a good drawing. You see the drawing and it's objectively good. And the other person says, "No, no, no, no. Yeah, yeah, Jozu janai yo. I'm not that good." And then you could stop the video and say, "This way of speaking, the rejecting praise, is typical of Japanese people. It's a Japanese person in the video, and they're speaking in a way that's typical of themselves as a Japanese person." So I love it. That's an excellent sentence. Thank you so much for putting that out. And I think that brings us to the end of our lesson. Unless there are any other questions, we could field maybe one more question. Otherwise, as I'm waiting for possible questions, let me just say I hope this helped. And the lesson that we went through, you probably know this, but just in case you didn't, it's inside of Wrench's menu. Now I'm using the website, but the app menu is 99% the same. Under resources, Japanese lessons right down here. And hey, a new level. And we are way down here in the N4 lessons. And you see these little video icons? This one will appear for Rashi as soon as I get this video uploaded. So if you need to view this lesson later on, then feel free to check it out here. It'll also be available here in our Discord in one of the channels up at the top, and in our hidden YouTube channel if you can find it. It's not one I really maintain, but I just use it as a repository for our videos. There is another way, and I'll tell you as soon as the video ends. Just it's slightly out of scope for this lesson, but I will mention it. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope to see you next time.